2004, Harris became district attorney of San Francisco. She held the post until 2011, whereupon she became the attorney general of California. We're joined now by Lara Bazelon, a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. In January, she wrote a widely read article in the New York Times titled, "Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor." Bazelon wrote, quote, "Time after time, when progressives urged her to embrace criminal justice reforms as a district attorney and then the state's attorney general, Ms. Harris opposed them or stayed silent. Most troubling, Ms. Harris fought tooth and nail to uphold wrongful convictions that had been secured through official misconduct that included evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information by prosecutors."
Welcome to Male Reality Lessons, where topics are reviewed and discussed as iron sharpens iron. On Male Reality Lessons today, I wanted to touch on this being an election season. You can't avoid the proverbial elephant in the room that is now walking the YouTube streets. No pun intended. In today's society, with masculinity constantly being stepped on and the traditional family no longer being promoted, it behooves you to understand in an election season that you have to stop voting party and vote policy. Case in point, if you are a member of the party that just had this major shakeup, that being the Democratic Party, and you feel like you've only getting treated like you were Charlie Brown on Halloween. Everyone else goes up to that particular party door and receives what they want, but in turn, all you get is a rock. Here is some information on why you should try to do something else.
You actually probably have to go back over a century to begin telling the story, right? African Americans start out when they become essentially enfranchised. They do so because of the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, and therefore African Americans sort of by default become Republicans because that is the party of emancipation. The Republican Party, while it's in favor of emancipation, is not really a natural place to put African Americans, especially as the Republican Party goes through the late 1800s and early 1900s and goes through some sort of realignments inside itself and turns away from a possible progressive move with Theodore Roosevelt and becomes increasingly in the early 20th century more the party of white-collar business interest, upper-class interest. But now you get African Americans moving into the North where they can vote, and they begin to find the appeal of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal very attractive. They begin increasingly to identify with the Democratic Party. Doesn't happen overnight, right? Partisan attachments take a while to erode during the late 30s and early 40s and late 40s to turn from a party that had been held hostage to states' rights in the South to one that was willing to embrace civil rights. You see that in the behavior of Harry S. Truman, right, who's going to integrate the armed services by executive order after World War II. You see that in the 1948 Democratic Convention. Then Senator Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota gets up and says, it's time for us to walk out of the shadow of states' rights into the bright sunshine of civil rights. At the same time, the Republican Party is struggling with its history of emancipation and civil rights. You get someone like Dwight Eisenhower who says that integration, desegregation should go slow. That sort of personifies some of this movement of the Republican Party away from its traditional belief in civil rights and extending rights to African Americans. Especially by the mid-1960s, you get Lyndon Johnson, who's going to take the lead on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and by that point, the shift is cooked, right? The Republican Party opposes it. Its standard bearer, Barry Goldwater, opposes it in 1964. He calls it a piece of communistic legislation. At that point, I think the door closes, right? At that point, African Americans who are politically active are Democrats.
You know, Kamala Harris, she's running for the vice presidency. I call her Miss Lock Up Her Brother, for when she was the AG in California, a Negro knew, a black man knew that he was dead in the water.
That's a damn shame.
He was dead in the water. Matter of fact, you don't need a trial. You might well go into jail if you appear before her, because she took pride in locking up black folk. And now all of a sudden she's trying to be sister girl. I'm telling you, check out her record. She locked us up left and right. Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
In 2004, Harris became district attorney of San Francisco. She held the post until 2011, whereupon she became the Attorney General of California. We're joined now by Lara Bazelon, a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. In January, she wrote a widely read article in the New York Times titled, "Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor." Bazelon wrote, quote, "Time after time, when progressives urged her to embrace criminal justice reforms as a district attorney and then the state's attorney general, Ms. Harris opposed them or stayed silent. Most troubling, Ms. Harris fought tooth and nail to uphold wrongful convictions that had been secured through official misconduct that included evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information by prosecutors."
Now from San Francisco, thank you for joining us, Professor Bazelon. Can you start off by going through Senator Harris's record, starting with her being DA of San Francisco?
Sure. So she was elected in 2004, and she took a pretty courageous stance initially in that she didn't seek the death penalty against a man who had been accused of murdering a police officer, and she did get a lot of blowback from that. Subsequently, she moved much more towards the center in many of her positions, and two things happened in her tenure as DA that I think are worth mentioning. One is that there was a big crime lab scandal whereby there was a lab technician who was using the drugs rather than testing them, and as a result, many convictions became tainted, and it turned out that her office had known for months, top attorneys had, and had not disclosed that information to the defense. And when a judge found out, she became quite incensed and wrote an opinion castigating Harris for allowing this to happen. Harris's reaction to that was to try to get the judge disqualified by saying that she had a conflict of interest because her husband was a defense lawyer. That failed, and 600 cases were thrown out. The second piece of her tenure that I think is important that not a lot of people know about is a case involving a man named Jamal Truelove.
Information by prosecutors.
Now from San Francisco, thank you for joining us, Professor Bazelon. Can you start off by going through Senator Harris's record, starting with her being DA of San Francisco?
Sure. So she was elected in 2004, and she took a pretty courageous stance initially in that she didn't seek the death penalty against a man who had been accused of murdering a police officer, and she did get a lot of blowback from that. Subsequently, she moved much more towards the center in many of her positions, and two things happened in her tenure as DA that I think are worth mentioning. One is that there was a big crime lab scandal whereby there was a lab technician who was using the drugs rather than testing them, and as a result, many convictions became tainted, and it turned out that her office had known for months, top attorneys had, and had not disclosed that information to the defense. And when a judge found out, she became quite incensed and wrote an opinion castigating Harris for allowing this to happen. Harris's reaction to that was to try to get the judge disqualified by saying that she had a conflict of interest because her husband was a defense lawyer. That failed, and 600 cases were thrown out. The second piece of her tenure that I think is important that not a lot of people know about is a case involving a man named Jamal Truelove.
In San Francisco, Kamala Harris appeared in the courtroom during your trial twice.
Yeah, the two times that Kamala Harris showed up to my trial was when I got convicted, and also when they laid down the sentencing.
When you saw her on the day that the verdict was handed down, did you take that as a bad sign?
It felt to me that she was well aware about my case, and she was there to set her presence, almost take pride in getting a conviction. When I put in my appeal, the people that's fighting against my appeal to keep the conviction is the Attorney General office. I learned it reading, their reply to my appeal, and you see Kamala Harris' name at the bottom. And now it's starting to feel a little personal.
When you win the $13.1 million, it's a massive settlement. Did you feel like that was enough?
There's not an amount that could get back those 7 years. That was 6.5 years that I spent in prison. But instead of me coming home feeling like I was a victim, I wanted to prove that I'm a survivor, and I will not let my story go unheard.
That case was tried by Linda Allen, who was one of Harris's deputies. And the case against True turned against a single eyewitness, turned on one eyewitness. It was a one eyewitness identification case. He was convicted and sentenced to 50 years to life. And the Court of Appeals threw out that conviction, castigating what Allen had done as gross and egregious prosecutorial misconduct. They said that her closing argument was a yarn made out of whole cloth. Recently, True sued the city of California, the city of San Francisco, and won a $13.1 million judgment.
If you're enjoying the video, please take a moment to like, share, and